morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. We are about to just get started. I just wanted to make sure everybody can see and hear us. If there are any questions as we go along, we will tell you how to go ahead and send those to us. But first, thank you so much for being here. We are here today with the Responsible Mining Foundation, the ING Bank, and the government of the Netherlands, especially the Valuing Water Initiative, for which I'm the lead. My name is Ambika Jindal. I welcome you all today to our session, which talks about water risks in the mining sector and why do they matter to business. We have a huge panel of very, very interesting, insightful, brilliant speakers who come from different walks of life, who bring different perspectives and can shine a very nice light on why this matters and how we can actually do something about it. What we hope at the end of the session will happen is that you will be more aware, of course, of the water risks, but you will also have a nice understanding of what we expect investors especially to do on tackling these matters when it comes to the mining sector. My name is Ambika, as I mentioned before. I am the lead for the Valuing Water Initiative, which is a Dutch government initiative launched at Davos in 2019 by Dutch Prime Minister Rutte. This was in response to him and the Dutch commitment to the valuing water principles that were launched by the United Nations and the World Bank. The principles are very beautifully written. They talk about how we need to recognize the different values for water, how we need to reconcile them, build trust, innovate, invest, educate, empower, all the good things, protect the source that we talk about, but it's more important to try to understand how do we actually do this in real life. What we have understood very often, and I come from a banking background, I've been seconded to the ministry by ING Bank for 3 years. What we've understood very often is often SDG 6, which is about water security for all, is viewed as one that can be managed or can be achieved if we have more taps, more toilets, more pumps, more dams. Somehow that responsibility then falls onto the public sector. What we know and we understand now much better is the links that water has with everything that we do, especially business. If we don't all come together, if we don't bring all these sectors which are considered thirsty or polluting, for example, mining, think also about agriculture, textile, energy, all of which are heavily reliant on water, which pollute water, which use water, and which often are competing with each other. So, we have to often make choices between should we put a mine there or should we let the water go to agriculture? I mean, these are very systemic choices that we need to make. So without the support of all these sectors, without the support of all these actors who act in these business sectors, we actually cannot achieve SDG 6, which is water security for all. So in that sense, I'm very, very grateful and glad that we are having this discussion with mining actors, with all of you who are involved in this sector to try and see how to value water better for this sector. Before I move on, I think one of the factors that we will be focusing on today very strongly is really on the investor's role. The Valuing Water Initiative is looking at systemic change in how to value water. What we've understood is if we follow the money, almost, we talk about it often, we realize that investors have a very large role to play. They can set the tone, but they can also drive corporate action. If you look at the power that corporates have, often being very, very large, very international, it's very difficult for a single government or a single community to drive that action. However, financiers have the possibility to do this. They have the possibility to drive global action. And hence, we're trying to now focus a little bit more and see what can investors and bankers do on this topic. We have launched a Valuing Water Finance Task Force last year. This includes 14 of some of the most powerful and big investors in the world, controlling $2.1 trillion in assets under management, which is a lot of money. The objective, of course, is that they will start to understand what sectors they're exposed to, what this means, and then drive corporate action by setting out clear expectations on what they expect these corporates to do regarding water stewardship. Mining is one of those sectors and hence has a very strong role to play in the stewardship towards water and towards the stewardship of water security for all. Last year, we had this session with the same people, actually, the same organizations that you see here today. We had this at Indaba in Cape Town. It was a wonderful session where we were able to really start to focus in on this topic and understand what mining actors value when it comes to water. I remember one of the corporates telling us at that time, if you think a corporate doesn't value water in mining, then you don't understand corporates at all. I think the question is not about just valuing water in the sense of obtaining water and making sure you have water. It's more about the second principle of valuing water principles, which is reconciling the different values and building trust. And that is where we see mining playing a very big role. Reconciling those values will take a lot of understanding from different stakeholders on what the impact of their action or lack of action is. And today we hope to touch upon this much, much further. We will be taking questions, so please do go ahead and do so. There is a Q&A button at the bottom of your screen if you're on a computer, or on the upper right-hand corner if you're on the mobile phone or a smartphone or in an app. So please locate that Q&A button, and please do continue to send in your questions and answers. The format today is that I will quickly introduce our panelists, ask them an opening question that we have drafted for them to get the conversation going. But we have the majority of the period of this session to actually take your questions. So we look forward to your engagement and your questions and comments, and hope to address them to the best ability that we can. With that, I think we should get started and get some of our speakers to start sharing their insights. I'm honored then to start with Hélène Piaget, who is from the Responsible Mining Foundation. She is our keynote speaker today. Hélène, welcome. May I please ask you to set the scene, tell us more about why water and mining are so connected and how we can do more about this.
Great, lovely. Thank you, Ambika. So the Responsible Mining Foundation has focused quite often on water as one of the key themes around mining. And we'd like to introduce some other concepts around this. So water is a resource that requires sharing. And as we can see from the difficulty the world is experiencing in sharing vaccines, it's clear that sharing of resources has its challenges. So we have this theme of valuing water. Ambika has spoken about it. And also, of course, this year on UN Water Day, which will be later this month, the theme for the year is also valuing water. And we think it's important to remember that valuing water is not just about sharing, but it also implies that we share the responsibility for how we share and treat water. So this brings us to mining and why water and mining matter. Mining operations require water, and a lot of water, whether fresh water, recycled water, or desalinated water. Even the most ambitious projects, like the concept of waterless mining, still rely on recycled or closed system water use. And mining, on top of that, often produces toxic waste that needs to be disposed of, for example, in tailings storage facilities, or less desirably in riverine, lake, and marine environments, which touches on one of the other SDGs, and that's life underwater. So mining also, and we're so aware of it today, occurs in the context of climate and climate change. Whether it is water stress in desert conditions, or sudden abundance like storms and floods, or the melting of permafrost that destabilizes infrastructure, as we've recently seen a big example occurring in the north of Russia. And as an ESG investor recently reminded us in very stark and simple terms, water in the context of mining is always local. It happens in a neighborhood of one or other kind that in one or other way affects others, both close neighbors like farmers and communities, or faraway neighbors like the big city at the that's downriver and that relies on the river for drinking water. And it affects those neighbors, if we can consider those we have to share water with as neighbors, in two ways. The one is consumption of water, that is the quantity of water that a mining operation draws from its neighborhood. And the other is the impact of its operations on the quality of water in its neighborhood, whether that's a river basin, a catchment or area, or something smaller and nearer home. Our research at the Responsible Mining Foundation shows that mining companies pay a lot of attention to measuring the quantity of water use and often employ technology to improve the efficiency of water use. And engineers can take a lot of credit for that. But we also find, on the other hand, that very few mining companies can demonstrate that they systematically track and remedy the impact of their activities on both the availability and the quality of water in their neighborhood. And the observable lack of disclosure at local mine site level, if one thinks about trust and risk on water use and water quality, is a continuing concern to those who realize that the impacts are local, and aggregated reporting at the corporate level that one sees quite often obscures the level of potential risk for not only those directly affected, but also investors, lenders, insurers. And of course, because the impact at local level is in general where the drama happens, where the risk plays out. So disaggregated reporting, in other words, reporting at the mine site level, is really essential, not only for those directly affected, but also for investors, lenders, insurers, and regulators. So this brings us back to the concept of a shared responsibility for valuing water. Private consumption, for example, a mobile phone or a bicycle of mining products, and public consumption like energy infrastructure, public transport, or defensive and offensive weapons that governments consume on behalf of the citizens, all drive the demand for mining of metals and minerals. So everyone should share the responsibility of mining activities and its impact on water. And this includes regulators, investors, lenders, insurers, and of course, supply chain customers. So we're saying we can't only point the finger at mining companies, we have to help them get there. One of the logos this year for the Valuing Water campaign reads, "What does water mean to you?" Good question. But if one thinks about the sharing side of things and the impact that mining has on water and other users, it may be even more important to have a logo that reads, "What does water mean to your neighbors?" So we're often alerted to cataclysmic events with huge impacts on lives, livelihoods, the environments, and future generations ultimately. We will hear from Helena and Wagner about an event in Brazil. Some of these events are due to carelessness, others due to changes in climate. But the impact is huge, and we tend to hear about those. As we sit in this conversation and both consider the responsibility that investors can bring, the role they can play in encouraging consciousness and improvement around water use, let's also remember the everyday misery of ordinary people who live in remote and water-stressed regions, often near to mine sites, with a constant battle for livelihood water for crops, animals, or drinking water. We hear this so often, and of course, these don't make big stories, but they really affect ordinary people in probably more often than big cataclysmic events. And then let's also remember on the other side, the less noticeable, but the slow pollution of water sources over time that can last long after a mining operation has ceased and the owners have abandoned their responsibility for the shared valuing of water. So with that introduction of the context around mining and water, I hand you back to Ambika and look forward to hearing from other panelists. Thanks, Ambika.
Thank you, Helena. It's a wonderful setting, I think, that we have looking at how water is shared. It's important then to understand systemically, what does water mean in a system? How are the different neighbors using it, as Helena was just talking about? Who better to tell us more about this than May Hermanus? May, welcome. May is from the University of Witwatersrand in South Africa. She has a lot of experience with looking at this from a systemic point of view. And May, I have an opening question for you, which I hope that you will answer to us. And then, of course, we will lead to more questions from the audience. In your vast understanding of how this massive system of mining works, could you share with us what might make the business case for reclaiming metals from mining operations? It's not convincing enough, and we need to make it better, and we want to understand what that could be. We also would like to understand then, what would the true price of such metals be if we did take the view that you have, which is more systemic? So if you can tell us a little bit more about that to start. Thank you, May.
Thank you very much, Ambika. That's a very big topic, so I'm going to have a go at it. But first, just a bit of perspective. I've been very privileged to work in and around the mining sector and with mining stakeholders over many years. And this has given me the opportunity to see the disconnection and the connection between various practices in the sector and its wider environmental, social, and governance impacts. And of course, everything that I say is up for debate. Some of it is nested in science, but some of it really comes out of, I think, insights that have come home to me. So for me, in the first instance, to develop the business case for reclaiming minerals and metals, which are derived from mining specifically, starts with a comprehensive evaluation of the cost of mining these minerals and metals. So the question is then, does the true cost of mining equate to the cost of reclamation or a cradle-to-cradle approach of the use of these metals? And of course, all of the costs that are externalized at present. Now, this brings to me two aspects of the mining process interview. And I've referenced these particularly to the discussion, the subject of our discussion today, which is water risks in mining. The first aspect is the adequacy of the process of recognizing whether a concentration of metal or minerals amounts to an ore body. That's a crucial one, and I'll go into that in a little bit of detail. And the other concerns the adequacy of the provisions made for mine closure or mining disturbed landscapes. So let's just go to the defining an ore body. A concentration of metals or minerals is classified as an ore body only when it's shown to be mineable. That hinges on the outcome of an economic evaluation. And this evaluation involves a structured exploration of the mineral and metal deposit, as well as technical and financial analyses. And today, obviously, our perspective of the cost effectiveness of mining is now expanding to include ESG considerations, but it's still very much a work in progress. So the questions still remain: are the water risks in mining properly understood, assessed, and addressed? And are these incorporated in the processes of economic evaluation of a mining of an ore body? And is this process widely understood by all stakeholders, especially local stakeholders or country stakeholders? And it seems to me that such evaluations must include reference to the water context of a mine and the associated costs of that. So, for example, the question would be in that evaluation: does the mine impact on water resources? Is it located in a water catchment area or near or on water resources likely to be affected by mining? And how does mining interface with the existing water management system? And in developing countries, including South Africa, in some areas, this can be very rudimentary and very easily disturbed by mining. So we need to know, it's necessary to know who your water users are, and they might be very far from the mining environment, as in South Africa. And how do all users access water? Some people have to access water resources directly through using tools like pails and water and various sort of bottles and so on to carry water. So in short, what are the safeguards required to protect the availability and quality of water from during mining and also after mining? That is costs associated with it. Another evaluation point is about the chemical reactivity of a mineral or metal which is being mined and the spoil, the waste material that's being produced. So if chemical reactivity is an issue, it's important to know whether mining will liberate acid-producing compounds or radioactive materials, for example. And if acid mine drainage is a risk, can heavy metals in the host rock or soil be mobilized? And what avoidance measures need to be taken? And what are the costs involved? Again, this ought to be done up front. The final point related to this matter is the location of mining in its wider context. Is a mine located on a large ore body? Or is it located on an isolated ore body? Are there other mines located on the same ore body? And will these eventually merge, or will their collective impacts on water quality amplify the felt impacts to the local community and to the local environment? And it might also be, in our case also, the country level environment. And if so, How are these collective impacts to be addressed? At the moment, we don't have an answer to that. And there are clearly financial implications for that as well. All of these issues that I've just mentioned apply to the very extensive gold and coal deposits that we have in South Africa. The second issue is the question about the adequacy of provision for mine rehabilitation, mine closure, or mine disturbed land. Now, just from a water perspective alone, will the rehabilitated landscapes be chemically stable? That's an important question for those who are concerned with financing mines need to know. Will decanting of contaminated rainwater from these landscapes show up on the surface? When will they show up on the surface and what will they affect? And it can take up to decades for that to happen, often long after mines closed or the financiers have moved on. Then, of course, the very big problem of very large mine tailing impoundments and the water associated with them. Now, in our case in South Africa, many of these kinds of landscapes can appear to be benign, although they're not. So we have many people who are homeless, displaced, and destitute, to whom this appears to be viable, habitable land. The consequences of habitation of this land can have very severe impacts for the health and well-being of many people. And then, of course, as we have today, considered by Helene and Wagner, the long-term stability of these very large tailing dams is a question that we're needing also to answer, and answer specifically from the point of view of preventing failure. Instability can lead to a tragedy of a horrific scale, as we have already seen too often and very recently. So to sum up, most of the costs that I've referred to have been externalized, and mining communities and mining countries carry the costs. And the options for remedy are about creating alternatives, which include innovation in the mining process, which mining companies are poor at, and in the reuse of minerals and metals. And of course, there needs to be another economic model here, an economic model which provides for the continued returns to countries and peoples from whose lands metals and minerals have been extracted. So in my view, when water risks in mining are underestimated, mining companies and the providers of mining finance are very likely courting disaster, and perhaps even visiting disaster on people in local communities. Thank you.
Thank you, May. All those considerations, they would take a lot of determination, they would take a lot of dedication from companies. What we tend to see often, of course, and I'm going to invite now Emmanuel Penny from Project SEPIC from Papua New Guinea. Emmanuel, can we see you? Hi, thank you. Yes, we see you. What May was just referring to is the whole exercise of what companies and others need to do, even governments included, to try to understand what the true price or the true impact of a mine is. Now, when we look at companies in general and we look at what they're doing, we see that often their values are quite local. So while they have global statements on values, they tend to sometimes act in whatever way the region allows them to act. So they may not have the same operations in Papua New Guinea that they might have in Canada or in other places of the world, simply because regulation is not so strong. Now, looking at that, do you see a role for investors to drive this global action rather than local action where they can take value or they can take advantage maybe of the lack of regulations? Do you see investors having a role there, and banks, which allow them to sort of make sure that companies act in a uniform way across their operations? Emmanuel, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Ambika. Hello, everyone. We've had this conversation in Papua New Guinea and elsewhere about how we think that supply chains, companies, corporations, banks, financiers, backdoor donors, all have a really enormous significance in ensuring that the companies or businesses that are doing business in, for example, mining in Papua New Guinea and for example, Frida River Copper, which the campaign is against. We think the investors, all these people, have a really important role in ensuring that this company, these businesses follow rules, follow laws, and follow their own values and principles which they stand on. And that's also already to me and to us who are championing this campaign already see a paradox. And the paradox, I mean, we all know it. Companies are set on capitalism. They're set on this, they're driven by profit. They're driven by economic returns. And so the costs on the environment, costs on people's lives are not something that is significant on their agenda. And that's the paradox. Every time there are organized, there are the people, landowners, resource owners going up and going against the companies, their needs and their concerns are not important because the company is on for profit. What the company should understand, and what we're seeing, and for the investors to know and to perhaps advocate for us, is that, and especially for us indigenous people of different cultures, different values and principles, we see the world differently. We do not see profit. We do not count things. While we understand that, for example, in science, they say water is, the super greatest solvent. In my culture, the Yatmu culture and language, we see water as a super spirit. And it's the same thing because we explain in our cultural totems, in our songs, in our dance, in our stories, and in our laws too, that we protect water, we value water, and that we are the water. We have clans that are named after water, and they cannot do several cultural things to the water or against the water in any way because they're related to water. The water represents their spirit. The water represents their ancestors, represent them, and people who are yet to arrive. We understand this in our own, say, for example, our Melanesian Yatmu cosmology. We also understand the business coming from their point of view and what they need. What the businesses do not and continue to disregard our beliefs, our values and principles around how we connect to these things. These are really important to us. I don't think a lot of people around the world, especially in the developed world, understand how we see and feel about the environment around us. And that's also another difficulty for companies and businesses to understand us. Recently, there was a triumph by a local community who campaigned against sand mining in just south coast of where I am in Wewak, in Madang, called Sumgilba. It's being reported widely in the internet, in the news. What the company said was that there was negative publication by the people. The people didn't understand business and economic development. Papua New Guineans do not want to embrace change, and that Papua New Guineans must understand that God, as in religion, Christianity, God, has placed the resources to be used. So this kind of mismatched conversation and trying to diminish our values, our ideas, our ideology, and our relationship to the environment is not healthy. Where can the investors come in here? I think in all our experiences in Papua New Guinea has been the companies, the businesses come in and they refuse to understand how the people relate to their surrounding, their environment, their land. I'm a science graduate. I graduated a degree in applied science, applied chemistry. I understand all this, but at the end of the day, I'm a Papua New Guinean that is connected to my river, that's connected to the water, that's connected to trees, mountains, lakes, tributaries, swamps, marshes, and savanna, grassland around my home. It's that kind of understanding is important, and that at some point in time, the businesses together with their funders and investors, should come to a point to say, listen, this is what the people want. Let's not try to bend the rules, change the rules, and work here simply because perhaps the sovereign risks are very high. For example, in Papua New Guinea and Indonesia, up for corruption, and that's why they ended up having the only river and tailing systems in the world, when everybody else it's illegal to have river and tailings. How is it possible that those companies are still doing that in Papua New Guinea and in Indonesia when it's banned all around the world? So that question goes back to the investors, the financiers, the banks. How could you sit there and do it when you know it's banned all over the world? I'll leave here.
Thank you, Manuel. A striking question, one that we need to think about how to answer when we start working more and more with our investors. So thanks for that. I would now like to invite Helena Taliberti and Wagner Dinez from the Instituto Camilo. I'm sorry, I say that again, Instituto Camila e Luis Taliberti, and they are joining us from Brazil at a crazy hour. So thank you so much for being here with us at this time. I have a question for both of you, which comes very much from my heart. The tailings disaster 2 years ago in Brazil led to personal loss and tragedy for you. It destroyed livelihoods. It caused severe damage to nature, irreplaceable, one might say. What role did you think that investors had to play in this? And what do you think they could do to make sure that it doesn't happen again? The floor is yours, Helena and Wagner.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon for many. Many thanks to organizers for inviting us to share our pains and hopes. As many of you know, our children, Camila and Luis, and our daughter-in-law, Fernanda, 5 months pregnant with our grandson, Lorenzo, were killed in the tragedy of Brumadinho 2 years ago. For everything they did while they were alive, they left us a legacy of defending of the most vulnerable people and protecting the environment from the degradation caused by companies and governments. Our word will be very short. It could be called a letter to investors. Mining kills people and it kills the environment. Tailing dams kill. Since 1960s, about 3,350 people have been killed as a result of the collapse of dams. There were 3,350 lives, dreams, and plans interrupted. Since 1960, more than 115 million cubic meters of tailings have been spilled into rivers, forests, lakes, and oceans. To know what does it mean, 115 million cubic meters? Well, imagine 500 iron ore big ships positioned in a straight line and spilling all of its tailings content in the ocean. Millions of lives have been impacted by physical and emotional illnesses, by the loss of their homes and their daily livelihood, by the contamination of water with heavy metals. This is the situation in Brumadinho today. People are ill, the suicide rate increased, the quality of water is really bad today, so we are suffering. So is mining. So is mining. Why? Why are lives and the environment being sacrificed? The answer is the 100 largest mining companies in the world had revenues of $600 billion in ore and metals in the fiscal year 2018-2019. The world's 40 largest mining companies paid a record $40 billion to their shareholders over the same period. So is mining. Finishing, I have one single question and some suggestion. Is it worth investing in an industry that has historically and proofly killed people and degraded the environment? Investors can establish a permanent relationship with the affected community. A two-way relationship between investors and the affected and organized community should result in an agenda of community commitments for both sides. Investors should not rely on mining companies' good faith statement as a method in order to maintain the relationship with them. Proof of transparency actions by the company and community participation in the remediation process may be required. Require that mining companies certify corporate and social environment governance practices audited by the international independent audit companies selected through public bidding and with the participation of affected communities. Specifically for Brazil, we ask investors to assist in the formation of a group of responsible Brazilian investors to open dialogue with the main Brazilian mining investors. And finally, we ask investors withdraw from investment in mining companies responsible for tragedies with a public statement. Then, demand a change in these companies' behavior, establishing criteria and an evaluation period to return investments. It's time to stop and reflect. We cannot continue at this pace because there will be no future for humanity. The planet does not need human beings. In fact, it has always lived very well without us. We are the Earth's guests. We are the ones who need it. Think about where you are going to put your money. Thank you very much.
Wow. Thank you, Helena and Wagner, also for being able to come to such a clear set of actions that you expect investors to take. It's timely then for me to introduce Peter Kind. Peter Kind from ING Bank in the Netherlands. Peter, hi, welcome. Thank you for being here. You see from the intervention that was just made as well, that people are increasingly following the money. They're, from going towards what companies should do very quickly are moving to see, okay, who is funding these companies? So they're reaching the funders. Do you recognize this as a risk for your business when you conduct it? You do engage with corporates in this segment, in this sector. How do you engage with them? What are some of the things that you ask them to mitigate the impact that they have? Because we understand that mining is an important sector for several needs that we have. Then how do we mitigate the impacts that it has? And last, I think, do you believe that we are doing enough? Do you think that we need to do more, and with whom, to drive water stewardship? So I have a multi-part question for you, and I hope that you will be able to guide us through this. Thank you, Peter.
Thanks, Ambika. And of course, not easy to step in after the very impactful statements, Wagner and Helena. And let me start by sincere acknowledgement of your loss. And actually, this links into sort of my opening statement. I want to give an example very much linked to your case where we got it right, but we achieved absolutely nothing. Following the 2015 Mariana San Marco tailing disaster, we actually engaged with Vale, which was a client of us at the time, to understand the root causes of the incident and the management actions taken to avoid this to ever happen again. And we asked them to engage with an independent consultants to assess the risks of the remaining tailing dams of Vale in Brazil. We were basically told that we were too demanding, and we just had to trust them as a large corporate to do the right thing, that this would never happen again. ING decided subsequently to disengage from Vale, and we exited the relationship completely. That didn't avoid only 3 years thereafter the collapse of the Brumadinho Dam, with indeed 270 casualties and devastating downstream impact. Now, we got it right to disengage, but we achieved absolutely nothing there. That having said, ING has a long track record of screening basically all our clients in all our industries on environmental, social, and governance risks, and both on client and transaction levels. We have been leading the setup of the Equator Principles, which set minimum standards for development of new projects together with the World Bank. We actually have an exclusion strategy, basically to say we do not want to deal with the laggards in industry, with the worst performers, because those have financial and reputational risk, addressing your question, Ambika, that we don't want to be engaged with. That is basically, that's the background of how ESG in ING and other financial institutions has been managed, let's say, for the last 10, 20 years. And we will keep that screening in place. We don't want to be engaged with laggards in industries. And standards are rising, and companies need to adhere to those. But we also see, we've also gone through a change in our own strategy here as well. We realized two things. It's not just about excluding companies. We also recognized that, well, one, sustainable business is better business. So those companies who are engaged in activities whereby they use less water, less energy, who are engaged in circularity, so recycling metals, ultimately have a better prospect. So we decided not to just exclude companies, but also to see where we can over allocate our funding and where there are business opportunities to help companies to invest and grow in these areas. And secondly, that sustainability or minimum standards are one thing, but ultimately companies need to be on trajectories to improve. And we have decided on a strategy whereby we want to help and support and push our clients to adhere to industry best standards and to continue to improve, and also give them financial incentives to do so, rather than just saying we like or we dislike a client and we will or will not engage with them. To come back to Brumadinho, after Brumadinho happened, we immediately called together the other large mining banks. And we used our collective brain power of our engineers to come up with a questionnaire and a tool to actually engage with all our clients globally and to try to understand the tailing risks, which we all had in our books, and of all the dams basically globally that at least mining banks were directly or indirectly engaged in. We have pushed our clients to disclose to us and also to accept best practice. And meanwhile, and that's an initiative I really applaud. The Church of England really started a multi-stakeholder initiative, and they have come up with the global tailing standards now, which does not only identify the risk, but also sets benchmarks for companies to adhere to, which includes engagement with communities, which has technical standards to it, monitoring, and also responsibilities up to board level to ensure that companies cannot escape their responsibility on this front. I'm pleased to share that we, of course, happily work together with the Church of England on that standard, and will also include their standards in our own environmental policies, which are being renewed as we speak. So action is taken, and it is a trajectory. And engagement is better than exclusion. To come back to the question on water, water is a very difficult topic. It's too much, too little, too dirty, and the mining industry is a large water consumer, and it will inherently carry reputational risk. But ING is supporting the real economy and won't disengage from essential industries. One of our main sustainability targets is to ensure that we fight climate change. And for climate change and energy transition, metals are essential. And therefore, we will continue to engage with companies who run their business in a sustainable way, which is better than to disengage and leave it to others, because the demand for metals will stay there and is essential to fight climate change. I think what we hope to get out of these platforms and how we can collectively get to a less impactful industry is to share observations, to share best practice, to raise issues and to engage, because water is a very complex topic. And the industry, communities, and financiers are only starting to get their head around these topics. Thanks, Ambika.
Thank you, Peter. There is indeed the power of engagement and trying to move the market rather than walk away from it, and that's well understood. At this point, may I please ask all panelists if you could maybe keep your cameras on and unmute yourself when you are going to speak. This way, I also feel like I'm speaking to a whole lot of people and not to myself. Yes, please do unmute when the question is relevant. I will try to direct. There are a whole lot of questions coming in, which is fantastic. I mean, fantastic engagement. Thank you, everybody who's listening and sharing their feelings and their questions, which is great to read. I'm trying to filter through all of this. There's a lot of good information out there. I'll start by asking a very good question that came in from Cindy Coltman. First of all, she would like to say a very powerful statement by Helena and Wagner. Thank you. This is a feeling that has been voiced by many, just so you know that. It leads her to the question that Helena mentioned about mining impacts and risks are not local and are not reported adequately by mining companies that may be aggregating to the global level. So how do we ensure investors are talking to local communities and giving more weight to their lived experiences in their dialogues with the mining companies? Maybe Emmanuel, maybe Helena, maybe Peter, maybe also others, but I thought of the three of you. Any response to that? Have we seen how investors have been doing this, if they have at all?
Well, I can try to say something. As a matter of fact, I can say that the mining companies are trying to dialogue with the communities, with the impacted communities in the process of remediation. But there is nothing that can assure that the whole community can really participate in the decision-making process. So what I said before, and I repeat now, investors should not rely on mining companies' report or statements. And the investors should demand proof of the mining companies are establishing continuous relationship with their communities. Otherwise, we will continue in this slow pace of remediation process.
Thank you.
Ambika, can I jump
Please.
in? So these questions are kind of interesting for us in Papua New Guinea because I have another question on that question. How do we talk to the financiers and the banks if, for example, the company is a state-sponsored company? For example, the Frida River copper and gold mine in Papua New Guinea is a Chinese government, the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party's government's business. So how do you get them to have a decent and a amicable conversation and understanding with people who own the land, own the resources, or people who are concerned about this? I am adding a question on top of this. In addition to this, sorry.
Let me try to address part of that. Clearly, the financial industry will not be able to resolve all issues, which should also be partly resolved by local governments and other investors. But when where we see a disconnect is between actual, let's say, asset investment or financing on a project level, whereby there's a very high level of due diligence on technical, environmental, and social elements. For example, if we work with the World Bank and apply IFC performance standards, then the level of due diligence, free, prior, and informed consent mechanisms, external independent consultants on the ESG front opining on those projects actually give a pretty decent understanding and process prior to a project commencing. Where it becomes more difficult if no such direct investment is taking place, it is more done by corporates or even by state-owned companies, whereby the lack of control that the financial industry can have or its influence is way less than when it is on a project level. And that's, for example, what we have seen in Brazil, whereby you have a large company with very little influence by individual investors or financiers to actually step in and make a change.
Okay, I hope that if that doesn't answer the question, that there will be a follow-up question, but this, I think, does cover it. I think there's a linked question. Maybe I'm right, maybe I'm wrong, and you will correct me, panelists, if I am. The question comes from JB Garganera. I hope I'm saying your name right. Sorry if I'm not. And she asks, or he asks, is there a global standard on doing water impact studies that goes beyond environmental impact assessment default studies? Is there a standard that we should be following? This is a question that has come up by several people. Maybe May, is there something you would like to take up?
I'm happy to pick up on that, but I also want to just caution about the idea of having a standard that's universal, because water environments and mining environments are often unique, and the risks associated with them are often unique to particular environments, not only the natural environment, but also the social environments in which mines are located. So, and I think this is the issue around mining. The issues around mining are really complex. Isn't one particular intervention that's going to make a change. But we do know that there are several types of interventions and processes that can make a difference. And so the interface between and the interaction and engagement with local communities is one of them. The other also is around understanding the big context of mining in a particular country. Where's the population going? Where's the water catchment areas? I see there was a question on whether some mining is done in water catchment areas. Now, we have a major water catchment system in South Africa on which all of our industry and most of our population is dependent. And yes, our gold and coal mining are located right there. The ore just happens to sit in that catchment area. So what do we do in that case? What do we do post-mining? What do we do while we do mining? And how do we understand that mining ought to be undertaken? So for me, the issue about starting with how one perceives of a mining project is another lever that ought to be addressed. A lot of the problems in mining become baked in once mining started because the plan's there, the mitigation methods are there, the impact studies have been done, etc., etc. And once this gets underway, there's very little that can be done to stop the project. You can stop the project, but it might not stop the impacts of the project. So I'm just going to leave it there. Thanks for the time.
Thank you, May. Thank you so much. We have a whole list of questions. I'm going to try to go through as many as possible. Let's try to keep our interventions as short as possible and as concise as possible. I just want to also add to what May just mentioned about the standards. I think the questions that we're talking about, as the Valuing Water Initiative, we're now working with disclosure companies such as CDP, who also contribute to standards such as TCFD, TNFD. These are mainstream standards. And if we start asking more meaningful questions within these standards, the access to information to investors and banks then comes in through mainstream sources rather than having to do separate processes all the time. Of course, separate processes are needed. But right now, what we are even missing in a big picture is really mainstream disclosure and transparency, what Helena was getting at also in her intervention. I have a very interesting question, which was the first question that was asked. Maybe Helena, Peter, and myself, maybe. Let's see how honest we can be with the answer to this one. Is from Raymond Phillip, and he asks, "Hi, why is nobody from the mining sector participating to present their view on water risks directly?"
I'm happy to go. So in general, we find it's quite difficult to get mining companies to participate on panels like these. We think that's a great pity. We'd love them to participate. But for some reason, maybe it's their lawyers that are afraid to be on a free open, recorded panel. But it's not that easy to get mining companies to be willing to participate. And we'd welcome offers from mining companies to be included in such panels. I'll leave that to Peter because I know he also tried to get some participation.
No, I agree. I think in smaller fora, we have active engagement and we also have people, multi-stakeholder engagement, but in these large fora, it's also very easy to become, let's say, the target of discussion, which is actually also the same for a financial institution like ourselves, but we happily engage in this forum. But we need engagement from all stakeholders to make this work. And I think there is also the tailing initiative as initiated by the Church of England is a very good example of one whereby science, investors, communities, and the industry came together and worked on a solution which worked for all parties. So I do see engagement of the industry, but it's still scary to join fora like this.
Yeah, I hope that they will watch a recording and see that this was a very constructive conversation and it had nothing to do with accusation. And next time we'll be more willing to join us. But indeed, I think it's also the tone and the setting. We hope to set good examples. There are fora where we are trying to engage with CEOs in a safe space. But I think it's important that they're brave enough to hear the voice of people directly as well. So we hope that that trend will start. There's a lot of questions revolving around artisanal mining. I'm going to ask the one that was most directly related to water, and it says, my question, this is from Baikatonda. My question is about inclusion of artisanal miners in the debate about water use and the consequences mostly in Africa and other developing parts of the world. Could the panelists clarify on actions towards mitigation of the consequences of water use in artisanal mining sector? Who would like to take a go?
Yeah, happy to do so. This is one where I really struggle because so many millions of people are dependent for their livelihood on artisanal mining. However, the health and safety standards apply, the risk that people take to risk their life to make this livelihood, and the devastating impact this has on water using mercury, for example, in gold operations, without the same bells and whistles that large corporates can put in place and can be held accountable for. This is a part of the industry and value chain that we just cannot engage with because it's too far away from what we deem acceptable. But it is a real issue, and completely ignoring artisanal mining is also impossible because there is no alternative livelihood available for many of those people who currently work in artisanal mining.
I'm happy to just follow up on as well. I think there's a real concern here because in many countries artisanal mining isn't formally regulated. There have been attempts to look at what kind of regulations, what kind of rules could apply to artisanal mining, but essentially it's an activity that occurs often alongside of formal mining, and also in areas where it's easier to access minerals because they occur in a particular way. I think again it asks us, those of us who are concerned about the mining sector as a whole and about mining livelihoods, to think about mining in the big picture in the first instance. Obviously, there's a demand for the metals that come from artisanal miners in the first instance, and the second issue there is the problem of livelihoods. And I think the problem of livelihoods is only going to become worse in the future, given the direction in which our economies are evolving, with less and less and fewer people in formal jobs, even in developed countries, and more people stranded without ever having the experience of formal jobs in the developing countries. These are big issues. And for me, it's one of it's an area that really requires far more discussion, because essentially, if I just understand the kind of problems that we are dealing with today, is in a way we've segregated them into different disciplines, different activities, etc., when they are all connected. And if one thing that climate change and the changes in technology are bringing home to us is that all of these things are connected, and we're going to have to think about them in a connected way going forward. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, May. I see an interesting question here on a totally different actor and the role that they could be playing. It's not maybe specifically to water, but I hope that you will address this in context of water. This is from Mika Habok, who says, thank you for your inspiring words. I would like to ask if the media can also play a big role in promoting responsible mining. Anybody would like to take this up? Have we seen media play a role? I can imagine the answer is yes, of course, but what role would we like to see media take? Maybe that's better.
I think, for example, it wasn't immediately picked up by the media, but I think Amnesty was the first to really to bring the story, but on cobalt and DRC and artisanal mining and sort of the value chain of that into mobile phones, electric vehicles, the whole battery industry. That was picked up by media and actually triggered a discussion on whether or not we should continue to rely on cobalt for energy transition and our battery needs. So there clearly media stepped in and triggered a wider discussion with actually US tech companies being sued for being indirectly involved in the wrongdoings in the DRC.
Ambika, if I can add on that, from what Peter said, I think one of the dangers that the media propagates is the easy use of the word green. When applied to, they even talk about green metals, trying to insinuate that through the green energy transition, the metals that get used for green energy are somehow good or better. And so I think that there's really care in terms of labeling and language, bringing home to people the huge implications of the so-called green energy transition. And then the other thing is this also sharing, helping people co-own the impacts of mining, because in general, we even find other organizations that sort of, because our name is responsible mining, suggest, well, how can you possibly be supporting mining companies? They're bad, they're awful, and so on, which is completely disowning the co-responsibility of society for the activity of mining. And so the piece we can do is try to encourage more responsible mining. We can't do without it altogether. And so I think media can play a very big role in educating how we think about mining and the responsibility we all have. Also, to come back to something May said, people often forget about abandoned mines. So many countries have countless, and it's literally countless because they're not sure how many exist, abandoned mines that are still polluting the environment, causing damage to people. And this is something we all need to take responsibility for. And I do believe that the media can help.
I think just to add to that, for me, the question of looking at the in terms of where we access metals and how we use them in manufacture, how we recycle them, is incredibly important. Because if there's one thing that's very clear to us already, is that the intensity of mining, both formal and informal, is something that is seriously damaging to our planet and to our ability to survive as a species.
Clear role there for media, but inform media. Maybe Helena and Wagner. I have a question from Alexandra, who says, or maybe you've already answered it, I'm sorry, I haven't followed, but anyway, for the benefit of everyone, dear Helena and Wagner, my condolences for your loss. As far as I know, the tragedy in 2019 was not the first in Brazil. In 2015, there was a similar incident. Do you know whether the legislation in the country has changed in connection with that failures?
Yeah, very simple question and answer, no. No significant change, nothing that can change the coming future. Right now, we have more than 40 mining at risk, at least 4 at the big risk of break. So the answer is nothing relevant has been done.
That's very disappointing to hear. I'm going to move on if no other panelists want to reflect on that.
It's not just regulations, because actually the Brazilian standards aren't too bad. It's actually the follow-up and monitoring and actually ensuring that companies stick to regulations even more than what's being put on paper. So I fully concur. We have seen no changes yet. Discussing in the follow-up and also even looking at the aftermath of San Marco and Brumadinho, it's horrible to see how long it takes for government and company to act. You don't resolve that with regulation itself.
Yeah. Okay, a lot of work to be done. Sorry, did I miss somebody? Emmanuel, please go on.
I want to add on to that. We had a similar incident in Papua New Guinea with the Okteri mine. That the dam broke and everything got washed into the Fly River. What the company did, that was BHP Steel from Australia, they had our parliament. They voted using the bipartisan approach to get the company not to pay any damages. So the company did that. They secured themselves and they left. And after 30 years, we're now finding all the heavy metals have moved from the lower chain of the food chain up to the people now, and they're beginning to show all kinds of symptoms of heavy metal poisoning. And there's absolutely nothing they can do because the government passed that law through a bipartisan approach.
Okay. Thank you, Emmanuel, for adding that in. What has developed, at least through this webinar, is we were talking about why a corporate is missing. We have a brave volunteer, Richard Morgan from Anglo American, who would like to share his corporate perspective shortly with us. First off, maybe, there you go. Hi, Richard. I'm not sure if you can also switch on your camera, but I will leave that choice to you. Maybe very, very briefly, an intervention on your end, just so we make sure that this panel has a balance of voices. Thank you for volunteering.
Yeah,
Thanks.
hello, Richard.
Hi, Helene. Yes, where to start? Look, I'm head of government relations in Anglo American rather than a water expert, but water is a key issue for us. We've got big operations, for those who don't know us, in Southern Africa and in Latin America. Certainly our and 80%, I think, of our operations are in water stressed areas, and with climate change there's going to be, and we're very cognizant of this, changes in weather patterns that will make that even less reliable. We're building a copper mine in Peru, where the whole dialogue, we had a dialogue table went on for about 10 years in southern Peru on water and access for the communities, and also the communities where you had formal water users and informal water users, and people were talking about artisanal mining just now. So we're very, very conscious that you have to have the proper consultations in place inclusively. And actually, while the dam was up in the mountains, was being built, before it had been finished, there was an exact example in the Andes where you get no water at all or no rain at all for 11 months, and you suddenly get a downpour. And it's devastating for the villagers downstream because you can't do anything with it. So there's a huge opportunity here, whereby if you involve people and they trust you, then you can ensure much more reliable water supplies the whole year round, rather than having a sudden flood which takes everything out. So it's not all a bad story at all. We're trying to do a lot on technology now, whereby we use much less water. I mean, the dream, if you like, is dry stacking for tailings dams. So you don't have water behind a dam at all. If you can do dry stacking, that is a goal. If you can then release water to other areas, and that again is part of something we're calling collaborative regional development, whereby you do a proper agricultural survey of the whole region, rather than the traditional, and May will know about this in South Africa, rather than everybody flooding to the mine, not flooding is the wrong word, sorry, coming in great numbers to the mine site looking for direct work. You say to people, look, we'll try and get the economic benefit to where you are, but stay put, and we'll try and work out with proper development actors what crops you could grow there and whether we can help get water there. So look, there's a huge potential win and vision here. There's a huge challenge and trust deficit to come back from. We recognize all those things. And all I can say is that any opportunity like this for us to discuss and to learn, because in fact, I was talking with our head of the environment team just about this, as to how we have dialogues based on the SDGs, including water, because as you say, it's such a sensitive area that people aren't always willing to get involved because they don't know what they can commit to. So I think the more that you can give us by way of this sense of a constructive forum, whereby we can say, look, we know there are problems, we know it's a sensitive area, we've actually got huge levels of competence and goodwill to try, and obviously you don't want to work in a company that's not doing the best it can for the environment. We're talking about nature plus now as a kind of concept for not just saying, oh, we're doing okay on this target, okay on that target. We're actually trying to think about it in a more holistic way. So look, it's not without hope, and I hope that we will get more coming with us on this journey.
Thank you, Richard, for joining in, for sharing that perspective, and for also making yourself available for future conversations. We'll make sure that the next panel we have includes you, and maybe you inspire some of your peers to join you as well next time. So thank you for that very much. I realize that we've almost already running out of time, which is strange because it really flew by very fast. What I would like to do is maybe one by one, I go through the panelists. 1 minute. So let's really keep to that. Your last words for all the attendees. There have been so many questions, so much engagement. We haven't gotten to all of them. Some brilliant questions that we've missed out. My apologies for that. But just one leaving thought that you would leave everybody with. I'm going to go in the same order that we started, just to keep things less chaotic. I'm going to start with May, please.
Sorry. My last words would simply be is let's look at this in a connected way. Let's try and see how one thing impinges on the other. We need to find solutions that work for people and for communities, the communities in which we live, and that has got to be the goal of our conversations.
Thank you, May. Then Emmanuel.
I think for me, my final thoughts would be to work on global standards, but look at the global standards again and think about how to decolonize some of the standards and processes. That's it.
Great. Thank you, Emmanuel. Elena and Wagner.
What you can say is human beings are the only ones who can decide where to put their resources, time and energy. When financial resources are invested in organizations that do not respect the environment and the human rights, investors become co-responsible for the deaths caused by them and for sacrificing the future of next generation. It's possible to do differently. There is a sustainable and healthy future for everyone to be built. So far, I don't believe in a sustainable mining industry, but I think that they can try to prove differently for us.
A good challenge. I then come to Peter.
I think the issue of trust is a very important one. Very often the technological solutions are there, but that doesn't mean that they're always applied, and it means that the industry and financiers will have a long way to demonstrate their license to operate, and that's something which is of the long haul and cannot be resolved overnight. We will continue to use our exclusion policy, but we'll also focus more and more on helping companies on their trajectories rather than just outright disengage. Those will be my final words. One thing which I think we didn't address to the extent we could and might be a very good topic for future discussions is the one around closure plans and after mine life, because they're very often on the front end, the paper plans are good, but ultimately when mines change hands over time, financiers are gone, the original investors are gone, there in practice nothing is being done. So that's an area where I think another multi-stakeholder discussion is warranted.
That gives us some homework. Thanks, Peter. I think that another point which we were not able to address sufficiently today was on arguments that we could use, especially when mining companies make certain arguments about how this is the only way, but there is no other way. What then can a financier and investor say? So it's a pity that we couldn't get to that. Before I hand over to Helena, I think just very quickly, also from my end, we are having, this is the year of valuing water. March 22, Monday, is World Water Day. We want to understand from you what valuing water means. We understand that valuing water is not always pricing water. Tell us what this means to you. Please go ahead, use your social media, whether that's LinkedIn, Instagram, Twitter, I don't know what else is there, Facebook. Go ahead, just you can tell us whatever you wish. Your content is up to you. Please use the hashtag value water so you can join many others who will be joining us to tell us what valuing water truly means. I want to hand over to Helena for some concluding remarks. Before then, I will say, then I can thank the panel after that. Helena, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Ambika. And of course, it's been wonderfully enriching listening to everybody from a practical and a theoretical perspective. I'd also like to do a shout out to somebody who's put a lot of questions in. It's colleagues of ours working in the Great Lakes region, Fabian Caramira We really admire the work of organizations that are working in difficult circumstances to bring discussions to mining companies and try to engage them in talking about issues like water, and also the neighbor relationship between big companies who have probably investors and also their artisanal and the smaller scale miners that are their neighbors. So my last word would be to engage on Wagner's words about looking for sustainable and healthy future for everyone by being good neighbors as we think about what does water mean for my neighbor in this year of valuing water. Thanks so much, Ambika. Lastly, to thank Richard, our unexpected panelist. Thank you so much for showing up. We'd love to hear more from you and your peers. Thanks, Ambika.
Thank you, Elena. Thank you to all of the panelists for being here. You've all come over, we've prepared this, we've spent time to do this. So there's a lot of work that went into this other than what has been seen in the last 1.5 hours. Your dedication, your insights have all helped us today, and we hope to see more people looking at this and learning from it, also from the recorded version that will become available later. So please do share this widely, also with others. I want to thank everybody who sent in questions, comments. I mean, I'm very lucky that I was able to look through all of them. I hope the panelists will get a chance to do the same. Some were very striking and very inspiring as well. I want to thank Pierre, who is behind the scenes, Pierre de Pascal, who has helped tremendously in making sure that this looks like a very smooth, a smooth process, but actually there was a lot of work that went into the questions and answers. So thank you, Pierre. Thank you, Responsible Mining Foundation, for taking to host this discussion, also on behalf of the government of the Netherlands. So we hope that today we leave with a good understanding of how this isn't an action of one company. This isn't an action of one person, one government, one bank, one funder. This is what we are all allowing to happen, and maybe that we are all very capable of changing. So with that inspiration, at least I leave thinking about what I can do to make a difference, and I hope it's the same for everyone else. So thank you so much for making the time. Please join us again, and we look forward to staying in touch with you.